I don't know where you are right now. Maybe you're on your way to that awkward family reunion. Or maybe you just randomly decided to take a midnight cruise in the family sedan. But wherever you are, we're glad you're here on the Remote No Pressure podcast. It's episode 2. And today's guest is the legendary Hall of Famer, Bob White. Today he's going to talk to us a little bit about his career, which spans over 30 years, guiding in Alaska and Argentina, and his crazy life of illustration and how it's evolved with technology. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. So, Bob, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So, I reached out to you first, and you went out to Argentina. What were you doing down in Argentina, Bob?
Well, I've guided down in Argentina since 1985, and now I host trips down there. And I was hosting a trip that began on the Lamai River at Jorge Trucco's Lamai River Lodge, and we fished there for 4 days, and then traveled on to Estancia Santa Rita, where we shot ducks and perdiz, which is a South American partridge, more or less, like a big bobwhite quail or a small hen pheasant.
Well, it sounds like you have a rough life, but I guess somebody has to do it, right, Bob?
Well, it's it's funny. I never really. Sometimes I forget how lucky I am, and I suppose that's just human nature. But I never really had a plan to end up here. It just sort of happened, and I feel very very lucky and blessed to do what I do. That's
great. So speaking of you do what you do, I mean, yeah, you guide trips to Argentina, but throughout the industry, you're really known for your art. Am I right?
Well, you would know better than me, because I really, to be quite honest with you, just do what I do, and I don't really pay attention too much to what the industry thinks or says. But it's nice to know that it's nice to know that that the industry thinks highly of my art. I paint and I draw, and I paint and I draw what I love, and it just seems that that work gets published to illustrate stories or columns or book covers or magazine covers. So by hook or crook, we kind of put it all together and make it work.
Well, you're not just fresh out of college. You have some life under your belt and some experience and some richness to your life, and you've gone through some experiences that few of us will experience, and some of us might. But can you just kind of tell us a little bit about how this all got started? How'd you get involved in art and in outdoor art, in your niche in particular?
Sure. Well, I'm on a short slide to 60 just to kind of give some perspective to things. And when I was a little boy, I was enamored with, hunting and fishing and trapping, and, every little kid that grew up with me that was worth his salt, probably had a coonskin cap and a buck knife and a BB gun, and we, ran around in the woods, shooting at whatever moved. But so I grew up with my nose between the pages of Sports Afield and Field and Stream, and back then a lot of the articles were still illustrated with artwork, with paintings, and in fact I think in the early days the first photographs were like super grainy and kind of hard to look at and kind of primitive. So I grew up with, those magazines and reading those articles and looking at that artwork. And as much as the articles, captured me, it was the artwork that really, propelled me forward. And I kind of always wanted to be that guy who did the paintings for the articles in the magazine. And, life's funny. I got into college. I graduated high school in 1976 and was in college in the late 70s, early 80s. And there wasn't a lot of support for representational work, and certainly not illustration. Illustration was looked down upon as something less. But I kind of kept my nose to the grindstone, and when I finally decided that I wasn't getting what I needed from my studies as a studio artist, I switched majors to art history, thinking that at least I'd learn from the masters and take something from that. And then one day, in my senior year, I woke up and I realized that I like to eat on a regular basis, and that my chances of getting a job as an art historian were probably zero. So I switched majors to counseling and delinquency study and family counseling, and that's what I graduated with, and took a job in that field and worked here in South Minneapolis with Native American families for 2 or 3 years, and finally just burned out and had a bad day at the office, and threw a resume in the mail to a fellow who owned a lodge in Alaska, and completely fabricated my history and my skills. I don't think at that point I'd actually even run an outboard motor. I had paddled a canoe but not rowed a boat. But I made up a glowing review of my skills and abilities, and this fellow bought the ticket, and I went up to Alaska and just started to learn on the fly, and so that's how I got into guiding, and then of course I'd always painted, as a young boy, and then just started painting my experiences in Alaska, and then that led to a job guiding in Argentina, and started painting that, taking my work with me wherever I guided, and pretty soon I was selling enough artwork on the side to get through between the seasons, and which is every fishing guide's dilemma. So, like I said, I really never had a plan to get here, but somehow I got lucky, and things came together for me, and here I am.
That's a fantastic story. Now, that first summer, can you tell us a little bit about that, when you went up to Alaska and you knew that the resume wasn't, it might have been embellished a little bit. Can you tell us?
Well, you could just, we can just be honest and say it was a flat out lie. That's pretty much the way it was written. But I wanted the job, and I'd always fished, and I'd hunted and trapped and spent time in the woods, and Farley Mowat was a guy that I read a lot of back then, and I was pretty confident about my competency. Mm-hmm. I knew my way around the outdoors. I knew my way around fly fishing, wing shooting, and I figured I could pick up the rest. And I think what really helped me most as a fishing guide was my background in counseling. Probably the easiest thing that a fishing guide in Alaska does is catch fish, and the hardest part of the job is dealing with clients' expectations and their foibles and their skill levels, either lack of or lack of. So I found myself being a counselor, but not with people who had been court ordered to do counseling with me. People who were actually paying a lot of money to go to Alaska and be counseled.
Wow. How did you see when people go out to Alaska or they hire a guide and they go fly fishing, what are some of the common responses that you see? I mean, I know you see when you're counseling people or court ordered, they may not want to be there or whatever, but you may see progress when you're counseling them. What kind of progress or changes, like say in their demeanor? Did you notice anything different about people when they were out there fly fishing? Did you see it? Like if you guided them a few times, did you kind of see a noticeable change, a relief?
Well, yeah, and so guiding 2 hemispheres, Alaska and Argentina, I've been asked countless times, so compare Argentina to Alaska. What's Alaska like? What's Argentina like? What are the differences? Mm-hmm. And my fallback response to that question is fishing in Alaska is like being 12 years old and going to Disney World. Everything is bigger than life. Everything is exciting. Anywhere you look, it's marvelous. The fishing is off the charts. I don't know of any place in the world, except maybe Kamchatka, Soviet Far East, where you can catch as many different species of fish in a week. So Alaska is like Disney World, and sometimes, just like with a 12-year-old, at Disney World, people become overwhelmed and start to lose sight of, what is so special about the experience. It's easy for people, who have maybe really, really struggled to catch a fish on a fly rod, to, before noon have 15 or 20 or 30 fish under their belt, and they start to get a little giddy and lose perspective, and their expectations about themselves and the day, I think in some ways it kind of degrades. And so a lot of what I tried to focus on was to just, celebrate my fishermen's success, but kind of bring them back to a point where, they realize how special an experience it was that they were having. And that they may never, unless they come back to Alaska, may never have an experience like this again. So, you don't just, take that grayling and that 16 or 18-inch grayling and just shake it off the hook because what you wanted was a rainbow. Right. It's like you kind of have to kind of coach and teach people to respect and admire that fish for what it is. It's a fish that only lives in the cleanest of environments and in the Arctic, except for a few exceptions in the lower 48. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And some people got that. I think the majority of people got that. And some people didn't. And, it wasn't my job or my place to make a judgment about that. It was just, my purpose was to try and enhance that experience by giving them some perspective.
Wow, that's great. Now, did you have with your clientele, Bob, was it pretty diverse? I mean, did you have like CEOs? Did you have, say, plumbers? I mean, did you see quite a diversification when you were out guiding?
Well, that's a great question, and that client profile has really, really changed. I've been guiding in Alaska now. This will be my 32nd summer that I've either been there for the whole summer or part of the summer. And the profile of the clients that I guided back in 1984 when I started, it wasn't unlikely to have a couple of plumbers, and they were buddies. They worked together, and they saved for a couple of years, and they put together the $2,500 that it was going to cost for a week in Alaska, and they had a big trip, or dentists or guys that worked at the garage saved for a few years and made a trip like that. And then with the economy, and the increasing fuel costs and the difficulty of actually, making a fishing lodge, a fly-out fishing lodge in Alaska work, prices increased, to the point where I don't see a lot of those guys anymore. I see more corporate executives and people in the in the stocks and bonds business. A lot of retired people who made a lot of money and now want to enjoy it and do things that they never had a chance to do. And it's interesting. I get a lot of, when I was guiding full on, which I don't do anymore. I spend about a month in Alaska off and on, but it wasn't unusual for me to have people, after landing a fish, just stop and take a deep breath and look around, and they'd say, if I had it to do all over again, I'd do more of what you're doing and less of what I did.
Wow.
And of course, from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's easy to say because you're retired and you've got a bank account bigger than the state of Alaska. But it was, what it did for me is it helped me gain perspective, just like I was trying to give them a perspective on where they were. It helped me gain perspective on where I was, and that was valuable.
How has being outdoors and fly fishing, how has that affected your life personally? I mean, I know you've got you're a counselor and you guide people and you're doing your thing, but when you're by yourself, how's the outdoors and fly fishing affected you, Bob?
Man, it's, for me, it's always been a point of focus, and it's fly fishing and all the ancillary activities along with that, fly tying, studying entomology, cleaning my boat, hatching my waders, all of that stuff just became, for me, a focus and a passion and a path, I guess, a path in my life. And the artwork supported the fishing, and the fishing supported the artwork. And in that way, I'm probably the luckiest guy I know. I think, I very rarely fish by myself anymore. And I don't know if that's because I feel it's such an important experience that it needs to be shared, or if I just don't feel comfortable. It's not that I don't feel comfortable fishing by myself, but I just very rarely do it anymore. It's something, at least in my life, it's something to be shared, whether it's with my 13-year-old daughter, Tommy, or my wife, Lisa, or my friends, or, or a client. I just, I've never really thought about that before. It's kind of an interesting thing that I'll have to think about before I can come up with anything meaningful to say about it.
Sure. I think that's pretty common throughout the community of fly fishing. People swap flies all the time, or, hey, you've got to try this, or, it's a very generous group of people that want to help each other out. And I as I'm asking you this question, I'm thinking of the last time that I went fly fishing by myself, and that's kind of a hard question for me to answer, I guess, too, because I'm always taking somebody and introducing them, and it seems like once you introduce someone to fly fishing, they don't go back. They kind of get the bug 9 times out of 10, and then they're asking me to go fishing at that point.
Right.
So,
and I think that social media and what we're doing right now has changed the way people share fly fishing. When I was a young man in my 20s, you hung out at the fly shop. I mean, that's where you went to talk about fly fishing and learn, what was happening and what bugs were hatching and what streams were happening and, techniques and, insights into that whole thing. And now with the internet, it's a very different experience. My son Jake, who is 28 years old, just in the last couple of years got into fly fishing, and man, those guys never fish alone. I mean, it's always, a group of 3 or 4 and, people are sharing pictures of fish they caught, while they're on the river, texting stuff back and forth. And, it was really interesting. Jake is building a hunting lodge out in South Dakota right now. He's a contractor, and took a weekend off to go to the Black Hills to fish. And he's on the stream. I get a phone call from him, and he says, "Okay, this is what I'm looking at. I've got these 4 fish. They're about 20 to 22 inches, and they're in a plunge pool. And I can't really get them. They're not rising, but I can't really get them interested in anything, And it was almost like a video game. It was like, okay, well, how far away is the first fish? Okay, he's 15 yards, and what's he doing? Is he turning side to side and opening his mouth? Is he dropping back? And does it look like he's pursuing nymphs? Okay, all right. Well, here's what I'd do. I'd put on some 5X, and this nymph trailed by that nymph without an indicator, and it was almost like playing, Call of Duty. In fact, if he had a GoPro on his hat, maybe there's a market for fishing guides that, they don't even have to be on the water with their clients. Maybe they just have a site and people call in with questions. It's like, Oprah. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's really changed. And I think in some ways, some ways for the best, and some ways maybe not for the best. Everything and every step we take down our existence is a trade, I think.
Now, when you started guiding, Bob, I mean, cell phones were not existent. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah. And how have you seen that progression as a guide? Do you see people having to turn their phones off, or do they have to? Can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen in the boat, in the bow of the drift?
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, I have friends who are just like top-notch guides, and they'll get on the river, and they're going to one site to look at the cubic feet per second flow of the river, and they're going to another site to look what storm fronts are coming through or not coming through. They'll go to another site to see what the moon phase is. They'll go to Google Maps to kind of remember what the layout of the river is. Is there enough back channel behind this island for me to try it, or do I have to stay to the main channel? How far am I, from the takeout, and what's my estimated time to get there at the rate of flow? And it's really amazing.
Wow.
I mean, in the old days, we used to make shit up and just lie, and and now the guides actually know what the hell they're talking about.
That's great.
How far are we from the takeout? Oh, an hour or two, give or take.
4 hours.
Well, do you think we'll get there before dark? Well, I'm not sure, but when we get there, we'll know.
Do you think that way of life, that simpler way of life, do you think there's a value that we've lost? There's a sacred part of that we've lost due to technology, or do you think we've just kind of adapted technology to our sacredness?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think we've lost anything, but I can tell you that a day on the water with me is more about the interpersonal relationship that the fishermen have with the river and with me and with each other than about information. I think if I developed any real meaningful skills as a guide over the last 30-something years, it's been the ability to kind of tune into the environment and the day, the temperature, the water level, and intuit what's going to happen. And I think that level of intuition and I don't know, that I having trouble coming up with words to describe it, but that sensitivity to my environment and to the environ that we're fishing in. I'm not, I don't mean to be judgmental, but I don't know that a lot of the younger guides have developed that sensitivity because, they really don't need to. I mean, they can get on their cell phone and they can call up, real time information and data that I can't or choose not to or didn't have the ability to do in the past. It's kind of like the blind person who develops an acute sense of hearing and smell, right?
Right.
So, I think, that's what I have when I'm on the water with my friends and my clients, and I'm comfortable with that. It just doesn't matter to me. I don't really need to know what the flow of the river is, to the, cubic foot.
Right.
I can kind of look at that rock in the middle of the river and see how much of it's out of the water and tell you, what kind of day we're going to have.
Do you know Joe DeMalderis by any chance?
Gosh, it's a familiar name, but I wouldn't know him if I bumped into him on the street.
Okay. Well, he's a guide over in Pennsylvania on the Upper Delaware.
Sure. Yeah, that's where I know the name. Okay.
Yeah, so he's a great guy.
I never knew how to pronounce his last name.
Neither did I, but I had to know for the podcast, right? So I interviewed him, and what he was saying to me was, you need to just fish. And a lot of these younger guys coming up, well, they'll look on the the internet and see what the rate is, what the temperature is, and they'll only go fishing when the weather's perfect for fishing. And he
that's
was
interesting.
And he was talking about, don't worry about that. Go fishing, and then you learn how to fish in all types of weather. And if nothing else, you become a better caster. But just go fishing. And I think it leads to that same thought that you're talking about here, is that you don't get that sixth sense per se by going on the internet and just fishing when the fishing's good. You get that by spending a lot of crappy days on the river and trying to figure out what these fish will take.
Right. That's, I think Joe had a very valuable insight there, and I couldn't agree more. As a counselor, my background in counseling is some days your clients or your fishermen are going to have a good day, and some days they're going to have a bad day.
Uh-huh.
And if you're not prepared to counsel them or guide them through a bad day, I'm not sure, if that's having the full package. I think you got to be able to deal with somebody who's having a tough day, or maybe the conditions are tough, and give them something of value. And the best guys I know can make even in Alaska, fishing can sometimes be tough. And the best guys I know can make a day out of 6 or 8 fish. And I've been bored to death, catching, the 60th fish of the day. And I'm not sure that the fisherman has any more valuable experience, with volume or size than with process. So I think a lot of it comes down to that whole process over product, conundrum.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine now you know, it's probably that last group of people that grew up without an internet in their home. You know, when I grew up, you know, we didn't have internet in our home, and I was probably that last generation of that. You know, in college, I got this laptop that was more like a boat anchor, you know, but that, you know, we never had computer, you know, growing up. So even like writing letters to pen pals or girls you meet at camp, you know, those like, you know, you write this letter and then you take a picture for her. You got to wait for your mom to take it to the photo booth. And she's,
right.
you know, and she's not going to pay extra for the 1 hour photo. So you're going to have to come back in 3 days if your mom's going back to the grocery store to pick up this photo. You got to put it
right.
in an envelope. You got to mail it. You got to stamp it. You got to mail it. And then it takes, you know, a couple days to get to her. And then she reads about what you were doing 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Then she takes a picture. She takes it to her mom. Her mom takes it to, you know, it's like, you know, just the idea of a pen pal is so like archaic at this point. You know, you just take a photo and text it now. And you sure as heck didn't make long distance phone calls on your parents' phone.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you know, like I said, you know, my son Jake and his friends are sending, you know, basically real time photographs of what they just caught to each other on the stream.
Wow. That's just incredible. Well, if people want, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just, you know, and the whole concept of photography in the last 30 years. I mean, you know, I used to go to Alaska with, you know, 100 rolls of Kodachrome and Fujichrome. And, you know, I would, you know, diligently shoot photographs, you know, either with or without my auto loader, which, you know, allowed me to shoot like one frame every 2 seconds. And I'd get home at the end of the season with 100 rolls of exposed film and take them to the lab. And a week or 2 weeks later, I'd get this huge box of slides.
Wow.
And it was like, holy shit. you know, oh man, I got that one just right. Or, oh man, that's a perfect shot, but I didn't get the horizon perfectly level. Right? I mean, now that's just, yeah, I mean, now that's the simplest thing in the world to fix or crop in or, you know, adjust this or adjust that. But I got to be honest. I mean, I'm surrounded, you know, I'm in the studio, I'm looking at, you know, what's around me. And there are probably 50 4-inch wide ring binders of slides from all over the world. And they're priceless to me. I mean, if a fire started in the studio and I had to run up here and throw what was most important out the windows, it would be my slides.
Wow.
There's no substitute for them. And, you know, and I worry about the whole digital image thing because, you know, I can go up in our attic in the house and there are boxes of slides and photographs, you know, from my childhood and, you know, even like, you know, old movies. I think they're 8mm, I don't know. And 16, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, there's none of that anymore. I mean, it's all on a computer or it's in the cloud or, you know, and who knows if there's actually going to be any physical evidence of what, you know, my kids experience to pass on to their kids unless they take the time to print them out and create something physical from, you know, from the Ethernet.
Yeah, that's quite a rabbit hole to go down if you start thinking about that, you know. Very easily our existence could be wiped out once we're gone, you know. Like,
yeah, or the cloud changes.
right.
Somebody gets pissed off.
Exactly, yeah, you know, and you don't pay your taxes on time or something. Or, you know,
right.
Put a lien against your memories, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I better stop before I give anybody any ideas, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time with me, Bob. Thank you so much. Your art is brilliant. It's good. You can tell that you're painting from your soul. It's not just, like you said, a vase that you're painting to make a quick buck, but it's something that's part of who you are. And if people wanted to find you, where can they get in touch with you and see your work, Bob?
We have, my wife Lisa and I have a very comprehensive and I think interesting and fun website, and it's www.bobwhitestudio.com. And we have a newsletter that is occasional. I'd like it to be weekly, but sometimes it's monthly. Occasionally it's bi-monthly, but it's a pretty interesting newsletter. It has an illustrated essay up front, and then some news and information about travel opportunities and information about stuff that we do here in the studio. So if anybody would like to have that, come to them. I'd encourage you just to go to the website and sign up.
Well, thanks, Bob. And thank you for joining us today on the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Our guest next week is from the Lone Star State, Houston, Texas. From On the Fly Mag, we have Jim Gephardt. They say everything's bigger in Texas, including the bass. We'll be the judge of that. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Remote No Pressure Podcast.